Okay, today I'm going to show you how to make stenciled hosta leaves. Before I start, I just want to mention my Patreon site. I'll get Frank to put up a link to Patreon here, and also my new book, which will be out very shortly, or already if you're watching this a little later, about stenciling flowers. I haven't actually finalised the title, but the title will be up here somewhere when it's finished. Okay, so hostas come in simple colours and in quite complex variegated colours, and I've been making the stencils to produce these hostas very recently and have had a lot of fun with them. If you haven't done any stenciling before and you don't know what goo is, you can go to my previous YouTubes and you'll find out how to make goo, which is a mixture of polymer clay and liquid clay. Here's the liquid clay. If you don't know what polymer clay is, well, you're probably in the wrong place. So, but here's the liquid. I use liquid Fimo, but I use all the polymer clays. I've got a rack full of clays down here, and I use every single one, so there's not a particularly recommended clay, although there are some colours that I prefer in some clays. I'm particularly fond of the greens in Cernit. I particularly like the reds in Primo, and I like the yellows in Fimo, so I'm happy to mix all the colours, and I haven't found any problem with mixing the colours, particularly for this this stenciling technique. For some of the caning techniques, you have to be a bit careful which ones you mix, because I believe that you can't mix Primo and Cernit. Well, you can, but you'll get a sticky mix. But otherwise, you shouldn't have any problem mixing whichever clays you want to mix. So let's assume that you already know how to make goo, which is this sticky mix of polymer clay and liquid clay, and it looks a lot like oil paint, and you should treat it quite a lot like oil paint, except that obviously it's bakeable, which means that you can bake it in the oven and it will harden. So let's go through the things that you're going to need first. First of all, you're going to need a spatula. Then you're going to need some goo, which you can have pre-mixed. I have, for example, a green, a couple of greens, if you can find the other one, a couple of greens, and a white and a yellow here, and these are the mixes that I'm using. This is the dark green that I've made with Cernit, and I've made this mid green with Fimo, yellow and ultramarine, which you'll find these colour mixes in my colour book, and they're the same colour mixes for the goo. The only difference is with the goo is you don't need to add any translucent, because the translucency is in the liquid. So don't in fact add any translucent, and for that reason you can't use old mixes that have translucent added, otherwise the leaves will be far too translucent. Translucency can be a major problem with stenciling, because we're trying to make leaves etc very fine, so they're already going to acquire a translucency from being so fine. So don't add any translucent clay, just the translucency comes from the liquid. Okay, so you've got all that. Let's assume you've got all that. You also need cocktail sticks, and wire, which I have pre-painted using model colour, but you can use any acrylic paint or watercolour, or indeed sometimes I use textile colour, because that also bakes harder in the oven, which is quite nice. So you need to have prepared some of that, because it's very difficult to get a light green, and I want a light green for this project. So paint a white flower wire light green. So let's assume that you already know all of that, and let me go on to the idea of the stencils. So this is a stencil set I've been working on recently. They're already covered in clay because I've just been using them. So you'll see that they're already a bit gooey and sticky. And this set for variegated hosta comes in 3 different stencils. One is the skeleton, I call it, the leaf skeleton, the veins. The second one is the one with the inside of the leaf, and the last one is the entire leaf. And we're going to use this one first and bake it first. Right, before we start stenciling, you'll need to make, oh, another thing you need, some kitchen roll to wipe yourself, your fingers and your spatula with. And if you're messy, it's probably a good idea to wear an apron as well, or an artist's smock or whatever. If you've got an artist's smock, I've got an old dress that I used to wear when I was a bit fatter, which makes a fantastic artist's smock now. So first of all, prepare a palette, just as if you were oil painting. Doesn't matter if you've got no experience of oil painting. All you need to know is that you need a palette of colours. I've been using this, so it's already messy. So I'm just going to clean it up, because what I want is plenty of space on the tile. I've used a white ceramic tile. I want plenty of space to do that with. So when I need to clean my spatula, all I do is I pick the spatula with its clay, with its goo on, and just press it off, and that partially cleans the spatula. So these are the colours that I'm going to be using, because I've just been using them anyway. So I'm going to put them together. This one's a yellowier colour there. You can see that this one's a bit yellow. This one's a pale green. And there's a mid green. So I'm cleaning all these areas where I've been working and putting them back into piles. This is where I've been scraping off the clay from my earlier work. There you are. So my palette's there. I've got a dark green if I want to use it. I'll be using mostly mid green, but I might add a bit of dark to it. There's a yellowy colour, because the leaves that I want to make have got a yellowier outside. Here's a similar one. This is a bit longer, but that's a similar one. And in fact, I'm working on a short stencil at the moment. That's because I've got 3 sets of stencils. The one that's available is actually the medium size. If anybody wants the long or short size, they only have to ask me. But the general one that we'll be selling from now is the medium size, so that it doesn't get too confusing to people. Medium size to me is the best one, really. It's the one that I chose to be most likely to be used. Right, so I've got a reasonably clear palette there ready to go. And the first colour I'm going to be using is the very pale green, which is nearly white, to make the skeleton of the leaf. So I've already started on this tile, and the reason I'm using this tile is because it's not only matte but very slightly absorbent. This is an unglazed terracotta tile. I'm hoping people will tell me in the comments below where you can find this type of tile, because obviously I've got no experience of other places apart from Spain. This is widely available in Spain and should be widely available in southern Europe and in hotter parts of the United States, etc. It'll be available in builders merchants rather than DIY shops. I think you'd be better off going to a builders merchant. And as I find out where these are available, I will put information in my website, etc. But I've just started using these because it minimises shine, and I don't like a lot of shine on the leaf. The next best thing to use is a slightly matte white porcelain, sort of, not porcelain, these are terracotta as well, but slightly matte tile, or a slightly gritty, even a slightly gritty surface, but not too gritty. They will minimise the shine. But a shiny tile you shouldn't use because it's way too shiny. It makes your leaves look plasticky, and we don't want that. So you take your stencil, which the first time you use it will be clean. Mine's not clean because I've just been using it. And put it on your tile. And I'm working this in this direction on my tile. Anybody who's seen my other videos may have seen me working in the other direction, which I normally do, but it's very important with this variegated leaf to start working long ways, because you want to do as many as you can before you have to go down to the next layer, and you'll see why later. So the first thing to do is get a little bit of the colour that you're using. Don't use too much, only use a little bit of this colour, because if you put too much on your stencil, you start having to scrape it back off and it's all sort of yucky and sticky. So I've just put a little line at the bottom of my stencil, just above the handhold. On every stencil there's a little handhold. There's a bit that's not got any stencil on it that you can hold with your fingers. So I've put a little bit there, and then I'm just with my spatula squeezing straight up that tile, and then cleaning the spatula off so that you can pick it up again and put it on again. You may want to do it 3 or 4 times because you don't want to put a really thick lot of clay on. If you, let's call it clay, I also call it goo, but this is because it's a mix, I call it goo, but it's clay really. It's just a semi-liquid. You don't want to leave an awful lot on because you don't want very lumpy leaf skeletons. So then you just take that off, and as you can see, it's left behind the little skeleton. I'll try and get you a close-up of those. So continue all the way along your tile, and on this first one you can do the bottom layer as well, so you don't need to stop after the first one. When you do the other colours, you will need to stop after the first line and get on with the third colour. You'll see what I mean shortly. But, okay, so I've done a full line, and I will do a second line before baking it, which I will be doing shortly. I shall bake that when it's a full tile. In fact, when I'm working hard, I have tiles of this and that all going in the oven at once, and sometimes I would maybe do a lot of these all at the same time. And this set comes in 2 sizes, so there's a larger leaf and a smaller leaf. I'm not sure whether this is, I think this is the larger leaf in this set. Right, so what you'll get back out of the oven, one of these is loosened, but you'll get all these little skeletons. Is it better closer or not? So all your little leaf skeletons are here. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the centre of the variegation. So that's the jaggedy thing. So it's quite a jagged little stencil. And I'm going to use a mid-green, but I'm going to actually mix a little bit of dark green into it because I want it to be fairly strong. if you look at the internet, you can find lots and lots of different variegations of hostas, and it's quite a nice plant to, you can use the same stencil for all of them. You can just alter the colorways that you do. Right, so these are already baked, so I can go straight on and stencil straight over that. And when you, some of my previous ones have had locators on them, and I've dispensed with the locators because they tend to catch the spatula and they're a bit of a nuisance. So you're going to have to locate by eye. So for this, I'm going to put my glasses on. So what I need to do here is put the stencil over this little skeleton with the top, the flat part of the stencil, just showing the top. That if you think of them as like a rib cage, the very top, like the shoulder of that, and you need the central vein to line up right down the middle. It will stick out over the edges, or rather under the edges, and you'll be able to see it through, but that will be covered in the next layer. Let me just put this down so I can do it. I've realised I've been working on the side, and that's been probably a bit difficult to see, so I'll just sit here so you can see it properly. Right. So that's lined up well. I've got a little bit of clay on my spatula, and I'm scraping up and then scraping off on my, I'll just bring that forward so you can see what I'm doing. Scrape up, scrape off, so that you've got a nice thin layer of goo. Now sometimes I'll put a thicker layer on if I want a deeper colour. But the reason for doing this nice and thin is because we're going to put another colour on top, and I don't want it to smear too much on the second run. The first time I did this, I baked between the colours, and you can do that and it'll leave you with a sharper edge to this variegation. But I quite like the painterly effect of smearing the two together. So that's, we've designed it with that in mind, and you'll find that that works very nicely and looks really beautiful. Right, so I'll carry on and do this one. If you get a lot of clay still on the board from over the edge, you can just scrape it off. Otherwise you're wasting the stuff, and it's because of the amount of liquid Fimo we use in it. It can be a little bit expensive, so we don't want to waste any more than we have to. Right. Spending time lining it up well pays dividends, really. So this is something I quite like doing. I find very relaxing to do it in front of the telly. Just sit and make a load of these at a time. Try, if you've got a big oven, try and fill your oven with this to save electricity. I've got an oven outside in an outdoor room. I've got like a second kitchen which has got its own oven in, so we're not constantly breathing fumes from the baking. I do like to ventilate any room that I use an oven in, because I do so much work, so there's so much baking. Right, let's continue with that. If your clay is a little bit too hard, it'll skip over the over these little veins and won't settle in. You can actually use that to make the variegation even more intense, but you'll get used to that as you do it. Some of the mistakes you quite interesting. So that's the last one on this line. Clean up the excess. And of course clean my spatula really well. That's why the spatula got so that's why the tile gets so, the palette, I'll call it, the palette tile gets so sticky and disgusting by the end of the session. Right, so now I want to clean the spatula. You don't have to clean it fully, but you will find more smears of odd colours in your work if you don't. Right, so now I need the third stencil, and this is the entire leaf. What I didn't mention before was obviously when you're working over the what I'm calling the skeleton, the leaf skeleton, the goo falls between that skeleton, so it doesn't overlay it completely, so you can still see it through a little bit. But what's very important is you can see through it better on the flip side, which is why I'm working on a terracotta tile. Also, something that's worth mentioning is because this terracotta tile absorbs a little bit of the oils out of the goo, it sort of almost starts to harden the moment you put it down. And if you leave it for a bit longer, there is less movement in the goo when you put the second stencil on. So when I do it now, it will smear quite a lot. But if I was to leave this for an hour before putting the second layer on, it would smear less because of the suction of the terracotta on the oil, which would take some of the oils out and make it stay in place more, rather than still being as flexible and moving. So yeah, I'm sure oil painters will know about that situation, about making things stiffer. It makes it stiffer and it moves less, and sometimes that's desirable. Right, so now I'm having to locate this even better this time, and that's why I've left the stem on this stencil, so that it helps you to locate it. You can see the stem. You need to see that all of the skeleton is within this last stencil. Right, so now we're going on to this sort of slightly yellowy pale green colour. It's a very pale colour, and so this will come out with a light coloured edge. There are hostas that are light in the middle and dark around the edge, and the great thing is, as I say, you can use this stencil for all the different colourways, and indeed for ones that don't have any colour change at all, just the veins. So I've smeared that across, and I don't know whether you can see that there's a smear of the darker green coming up from each leaf, and that looks slightly smeared and very painterly. It's really very pretty, I think. Right, let's go ahead and do another one of those. And once you get going, you can go really quite quickly. You'll see what's happened here. Oh, this is quite interesting. That I've not cleaned I've not scraped over it again here, and so there's like a double layer here, which is a mistake. But I was going too quickly and not not taking care. So really you want to go right over it and then take the clay back off so it's not too thick. Don't put too much on, because if you put too much on it gets very, very clarty and sticky, and you do have trouble getting it back off again. So if you've got quite a lot on your board, just take it off by scraping back off onto that. So the reason that I didn't start on the next one with the dark green on the next line is the same reason as I'm using it lengthways, is because if I'd put the dark green on these ones below, then I wouldn't have been able to put this top colour on before baking it first, because it would have been too sticky and I'd have just made a terrible mess. So I work in sort of horizontal lines. There's that rogue bit of white again. Right, so that's the first line. I won't do a second one. Obviously I'll do it when the cameras stop rolling. What you can do, which I've only just thought about, I've done it before but it just never occurred to me. I was showing my patrons how to do it earlier today, and never thought to say that you can put the wire in at this stage and it saves extra baking time. So here's my painted wire, which I've painted with model colour. I've painted a sort of mid green colour. So where did I put my scissors? There they are. If you're going to stick them on while it's still on the tile, you want to cut these really pretty short, because you don't want the stem to stick over the lower leaf. So let's cut these into 1 inch lengths. That's 2.5 centimeters. Might even be a little bit shorter than that, maybe 2 centimeters. I'm not quite sure because I haven't got my tape measure out at the moment, but nice short pieces that don't need to be very long. I'll leave that to one side. And so the next thing that you need to do is to make a little mix of a mid green, not too bright, and put it on your spatula, and then take a piece of wire and trail this in the goo at the end of towards the end of the spatula, and you might need to clean it off a bit further down the spatula, and just put my arm on that, pop that on to the leaf. Time will tell whether this sticks well. I might need to just wiggle it a little bit to make sure it sticks well, because when you do it when the leaf is already baked, you can make sure that it's stuck in the right place. While it's on the tile, it's a little bit more difficult to ensure that it's completely stuck all the way down. So there you go. I think if you give it a little twist, whoops, while it's on there, a little wiggle, make sure it sticks well. So, and another one. I won't do all of these because it'll just be tedious to watch. But So just make sure that it's really stuck well before you bake it, because otherwise it's just going to peel off and you don't want that. Okay, so I've put these in so that they're most of the way up the leaf, with just a tip that doesn't have any stem on it. Okay, right, so I shall just go and get my baked ones out of the oven soon. So here are the baked leaves. It's rather a hot tile, and really I should have given it some time to cool down, but time is of the essence. Plus, if you start with a hot leaf straight off a hot tile, you can do the next process. I forgot to tell you about these. These are little pegs, little Chinese shop tiny craft pegs, and if you clip that while it's still hot, it'll give your leaf some shape. Another little trick, let me just put that slightly out of the way. Another little trick is for you to put your finger on the end of that leaf. So you're holding it between your thumb and forefinger, and then pressing the end slightly down as you clip with your little clip, and just clip the very end. And I'm not sure if you can see that, so I'll do you a close-up. That's clipped so that it cools into shape. If this is already cool when you start, just pop these clipped like that back in the oven for you can put it on a low temperature for 5 or 10 minutes. 5 minutes is fine, doesn't need very long, and then leave it to cool again, and that will make that leaf come out shaped rather than just a flat little leaf. The difference is quite fantastic. It's just one of those little things that a flat leaf looks a bit silly, whereas a curved leaf looks a lot more realistic. So let's take a couple more of those off and do that. So just take these off, stick the finger over, clip. Whoop. Should have left them on to stay hot really while I did it. So but as soon as the clip's on, if you're starting with them hot, as soon as the clip's on, they'll start to cool, and that's okay. Whereas if you're starting with a cool one, you'll have to put them all in the oven. So I'll just do a few more of these, because I'm going to want them in a minute for the final put together. So as you can see, that's quite easy to do. Even though I would put that on one of my more difficult stencils, once you put it together like this, it's actually quite an easy leaf to put together as a plant. Whereas with some of the easier stencils, the ones I call easier, there's a lot more messing about afterwards. So even though I put this at a higher difficulty rating, it's maybe a little bit confusing, because it's not actually that. There's not much to do after it's baked. That's one thing. I don't mind if there's a few little mistakes in here, because just like nature, they're not all perfect. So if you haven't seen any of my other videos, you might not realise how I put these little pots together. These pots are from a friend of mine called Miguel Angel, and his business is called Mi Baco, which I'll try and put the information for that for you. You may find that you can't get them from him unless you're a wholesaler. So if you have any problems, get in touch with me by Facebook or email and ask me, and I'll put you on to to another supplier, or I think Frank will sell them, but we're running a bit low at the moment. So and I have coloured these, and this is all in my book. I've coloured these with a little white paint and a little green paint just to age them a little bit. Inside I've put some leftover Fimo, and then I've, using my spatula, I've coated the leftover Fimo with a bit of goo. You can use green or brown, it doesn't matter. And then here it is, I have some scenic material here. This is from a company called We Folk Interiors. I'm not sure if they're still around. Again, I'll have to look for them. If you can't find them, I think all they've done here is they've taken coconut fibre and milled it to a nice fine material, and it's fantastic for soil. So all you do is, when you've got your filled pot with the goo on top, you just dip it in that, and then take a cocktail stick. So this is your first use of the cocktail stick. Push your cocktail stick in the middle, wiggle it around a bit to leave you with a nice, let me see which camera is best, a nice hole in the middle there. And then bake that. So for the last part, you're just putting them together. I'm not going to use any more baking because once you've set these little leaves into the shape you want them, you don't want to unset them by heating them. So I don't use any more heat. So the next thing I want is some glue. I'm not sure whether this is open enough. I might have to use a different glue bottle. I haven't got a pin to stick down there, so I shall just get a bit of glue. So all I'm using is a tacky glue, a fairly fast tack. I tend to use fast tack because I use it on all my paper kits. So just put a little bit of glue in the centre hole, and now it's time to take these little leaves off and just pop them in and arrange them. It really is as simple as that. I've got some smaller ones somewhere because when you buy oh no, that's the wrong colourway, I think. I can't use those ones. So there are some smaller leaves, but this one will have to go together with just one size of leaf. I'll just trim that off. That's a bit spiky there. So I tend to work in odd numbers if I can, because they always look better. So I've put 3, I'm using a very small pot, so I've put 3 in there first, and then I'm going to go for the next 3. So I'll need a little bit more glue. Where did I put the gluey thing? Because this is such fast tack glue, it tends to go off before I want it to. A little bit more glue, and add a few more petals. This might be too long, this one. It is. So the great thing about putting the hole down the middle is they tend to all pop down that middle, and if they're too long you can just trim them off at that point. So simple, just add as many little leaves as you want. So I tend to do about 5 or 6 of the bigger ones, and then put a couple of the smaller ones in. I haven't got my glasses on, so I can't see what I'm doing there. So these haven't really bent as well as I would like them to. So I would probably, because it's so warm here, I haven't cooled down as much as I would like. Anyway, so there's my finished plant. I'd probably put one more in actually. I'll stick this one in the side. But look at pictures on the internet of how hostas grow, because sometimes they'll grow in several different clumps. And you might want to put some little ones in the side as well. Try not to make them too tidy. There we go, that's the little plant. Okay, so please don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to visit my website, which is www.angiescarr.co.uk. Please make yourself a friend if you're not already on Facebook, and take a look at my Patreon page, where you can join up for a very small amount of money and see live videos like this before anybody else does. Basically, I do little live chatty videos that are very much like this but more interactive, and my patrons get to see what I'm up to on an almost daily basis. So before the rest of the world, before anything's published, you'll get to see what I'm inventing, or even thinking about inventing at the time that it happens, rather than 6 months later or a year later when the book's out or whatever. So please consider doing that. See you later.